The big white mansion stood on the edge of the city, silent like a sleeping giant. Inside, the sound of footsteps echoed on polished marble floors. Maids moved quickly, but no one dared to make noise. Everyone knew the rules. The master of the house, Mr. Dalton, hated disturbance. On the second floor, in a large sunny room, a young man sat in a wheelchair. His name was Ethan Dalton, the only son of the millionaire. His hair was neat, his clothes were perfect, but his eyes told a different story. A story of loneliness. Ethan had never walked. Since birth, his legs had been weak, useless to him. Doctors tried. Therapists tried. But nothing changed. The maids treated him with care, always soft-spoken, always doing everything for him. They brought his food, his books, his water. They never let him struggle for anything. They thought they were helping, but in truth, they were building walls around him. Ethan didn't mind anymore. He had learned to live like this, a prisoner in his own body. But deep down, a small, forgotten part of him still wondered what it would feel like to stand, to take one step. Even just one. That morning, the old head maid, Mrs. Harris, was waiting nervously in the hallway. A new maid was coming. Mr. Dalton had personally hired her. This was strange. He never cared about servants. The front door opened, and in stepped Grace. She was young, in her mid-20s, with dark skin that glowed under the sunlight and sharp, determined eyes. She didn't look timid like the others. She carried herself with quiet strength, as if she had seen hard days and survived them. Mrs. Harris whispered, "You'll be taking care of the young master's room. Remember, don't upset him. He doesn't talk much, and never mention his legs." Grace only nodded. She walked upstairs, carrying fresh bed sheets. Her footsteps were steady, not hurried, not afraid. When she entered Ethan's room, she saw him by the window, reading. He didn't look up. "Your tea is on the table," she said softly. He didn't answer. Most new maids gave up at that point, but Grace didn't move away. She began changing the bed sheets, humming a tune under her breath. Ethan frowned. No one hummed in his room before. After a few minutes, Grace finally spoke again, not with pity, but with something else in her voice. "Why are you sitting there like a prisoner?" she asked casually. Ethan looked up, startled. "What? Your legs are waiting for you," she said, meeting his eyes. For a moment, Ethan felt anger. Who was she to talk like that? Everyone in this house treated him like fragile glass. No one dared to speak about his legs. And yet, here she was, on her first day, acting as if she knew him. "You don't understand," Ethan said coldly, turning back to his book. "I can't walk." Grace didn't reply. She simply finished her work and left, her humming fading down the hallway. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. Her words kept echoing in his head. "Your legs are waiting for you." No one had ever said that to him. Everyone said you can't. But she had spoken as if he could. The next morning, Ethan wheeled himself into the garden for fresh air. From a distance, he heard footsteps, fast, rhythmic. He turned his chair towards the sound and froze. It was Grace. She was running barefoot across the grass, her hair bouncing behind her. Her face calm but focused. She moved like someone who had done this 1,000 times. And yet, there was something strange. Her eyes were closed, as if she was running through a memory. When she stopped to catch her breath, Ethan called out without thinking, "Why do you run every night?" Grace glanced at him, her breathing heavy, to remember, and to never forget, she said simply. Then she walked past him without explaining. Ethan stared after her, puzzled. Remember what? Forget what? That afternoon, Grace came to bring his lunch. She placed the tray on the table and stood there. "Do you want your book from the shelf?" she asked. "Yes," Ethan said, pointing to the one on the top. Grace walked over, took the book, and then, instead of handing it to him, she placed it back higher, on the very top shelf. Ethan frowned. "What are you doing? Do you want it?" she said calmly. "You'll have to reach it yourself." Ethan's hands tightened on the armrests of his wheelchair. "Are you mocking me?" "No," she said, her voice steady. "I'm reminding you that you still have a choice." She left without another word. That night, Ethan sat alone, staring at the high shelf. His heart pounded. He knew it was impossible. But he also knew he couldn't stop thinking about it. For the first time in years, he imagined himself standing. The thought was both terrifying and thrilling as he drifted into an easy sleep. One question burned in his mind. Who is Grace? And why does she believe I can walk? The next few days in the Dalton mansion were quiet, at least for everyone else. For Ethan, things were different. He found himself noticing Grace more than he wanted to. She was unlike the other maids. She never tiptoed around him. She never spoke with that fake, sweet tone people used when they felt sorry for him. When she cleaned his room, she moved with purpose, not pity. When she brought his food, she didn't wait for him to say thank you. She simply placed it down and left. But every time she spoke, her words stayed in his head longer than they should. On the fourth night after she arrived, Ethan woke to a faint sound outside his window. A steady, quick rhythm. At first, he thought it was rain, but when he looked through the curtains, he saw her again. Grace was in the garden, barefoot, running. Her dark skin glistened under the moonlight, her face calm but intense. It wasn't the slow, casual jogging people did for exercise. No, she ran like someone chasing or escaping something. Her strides were sharp, powerful. Ethan couldn't stop watching. It was strange in his mind. Running was something distant, something other people did, but watching her made it feel real. Alive the next morning, he waited for her to bring breakfast. When she came, he asked, "Why do you run every night?" She didn't answer right away. She poured him tea, placed toast on his plate, and then finally said, "To remember, and to never forget." He frowned. "That doesn't make sense." "It will," she replied. And then she left. Later that day, Ethan overheard two other maids talking in the hallway. "She's different, isn't she?" One whispered, "Yes," the other said. "And have you seen her hands? They're calloused, like she's worked with ropes or weights, not like a regular maid." Ethan wheeled back into his room before they could see him. Now his curiosity was burning. That evening, Grace came again to tidy his room. She noticed his sketch pad lying open on the desk. Ethan had drawn a simple figure, a person standing, their legs shaded darker than the rest. "Is this you?" she asked. Ethan looked away. "It's nobody." Grace smiled faintly, but there was sadness in her eyes. "You know, my younger brother used to draw himself with wings. Said he wanted to fly." "Did he?" Ethan asked. Her smile faded. "They told him he would never walk again. He didn't need wings. He needed legs." Ethan's eyes widened slightly. "What happened?" She didn't answer. She went back to dusting the shelves. "But before leaving," she said, "he walks now, runs faster than me." Because we didn't believe them? That night, Ethan dreamed of a boy with broken legs, trying to stand while someone, maybe Grace, pulled him up step by step. When he woke up, he saw Grace in the garden again. But this time, she wasn't running alone. There was a tall, athletic young man with her, maybe 20 years old. He was running alongside her, laughing. The sight made Ethan's heart race. Could this be her brother? The next day, Ethan asked directly, "The man running with you last night, was he your brother?" Grace stopped in the middle of folding his blanket. She didn't look at him, but her voice softened. "Yes, the one they said would never walk." Ethan swallowed hard. "How did you? How did he?" "Pain," she said simply, "and patience." and someone who refused to give up on him. That afternoon, Grace did something unexpected. She rolled his wheelchair to the edge of the rug in his room and placed a chair just a few steps away. "What is this?" Ethan asked. "Your challenge," she said. "Stand and reach the chair." Ethan laughed bitterly. "You're crazy." "Maybe," she said. "But so was my brother when he took his first step." Ethan's hands trembled. "I'll fall, then fall," she replied. "And get up again." Something in her voice made his chest tighten. He didn't know if it was anger or hope, but it made him grab the wheelchair's armrests and push himself upward. His legs shook violently. His arms did most of the work. He barely lifted himself before collapsing back into the seat. Grace didn't look disappointed. She simply said, "Tomorrow, we try again." That night, Ethan stared at the ceiling for hours. He could feel the ghost of that movement, the slight pull in his thigh muscles, the faint stretch in his calves. It had been so long since he felt anything there. For the first time in years, he thought. Maybe it wasn't impossible. And for the first time, the thought of walking didn't feel like a cruel dream. It felt like a challenge. The next morning, the sunlight streamed into Ethan's room, touching his face. He hadn't slept much. His mind had been replaying Grace's words over and over. "Stand and reach the chair." It sounded so simple, but his body knew it was. Anything but when Grace walked in with his breakfast. She didn't greet him the way the other maids would. She didn't ask how he was feeling or offer fake comfort. Instead, she set the tray down and said, "We're doing it again today." Ethan groaned. "You're relentless." She smiled faintly. "And you're still breathing, so you can try." After he ate, Grace moved the chair again, placing it 3 steps away from his wheelchair. The distance felt like miles. "Same rules," she said. "Stand. Reach the chair." Ethan stared at it, his palms sweating. He looked up at her. "And if I fall, I'll catch you," she said without hesitation. He gripped the armrests, pushed down with his arms, and tried to lift himself. His legs trembled violently, refusing to take his weight. He managed to rise halfway before collapsing back down. Again, Grace said, "I can't." Again. He tried, failed, tried again. Fell back harder this time. His chest burned. With frustration, "Why are you making me do this?" He snapped. "Because," she said quietly, "you don't believe you can." Her calm tone made him angry. "You think I've never tried before? I've spent my whole life being told maybe one day by doctors, but one day never comes." Grace crouched in front of him, meeting his eyes. "And I've spent my whole life watching people accept the word never because it's easier than fighting." Her gaze didn't waver. "I'm not here to be your nurse. I'm here to be the person who refuses to let you quit." Something inside Ethan shifted. He didn't like her persistence, but he couldn't deny it stirred something in him. This time, he pushed harder. His legs felt like stone, but with every ounce of strength, he forced himself upright. For 2 seconds, he stood. His knees wobbled, his heart pounded. Then his legs buckled, and he fell forward straight into Grace's arms. She steadied him, without a word, helping him back into the wheelchair. "You stood longer than yesterday," she said simply. "That's progress." Ethan shook his head, still breathing hard. "It's nothing." Grace's lips curved into the smallest smile. "It's everything." Later that day, Ethan sat alone, replaying the moment in his mind. 2 seconds. That's all it had been. But it was 2 more seconds than he'd had in years. He wheeled himself to the window, watching the garden. The same chair Grace had placed for him was now sitting under a tree. A thought struck him. What if he tried when she wasn't there? That night, when the mansion was quiet, Ethan wheeled himself to the garden. The cool night air brushed against his skin. He positioned himself near the chair. He took a deep breath, grabbed the armrests, and pushed. His legs shook like before. But he managed to rise for a single heartbeat before collapsing back down. He sat there, panting, angry at himself. That's when he heard a voice behind him. "You could have asked for help," Grace said. Ethan jumped slightly. "I didn't want you to see me fail." Grace walked forward, her expression unreadable. Failing in front of someone who believes in you isn't weakness. Hiding is. She moved the chair closer to him this time. "One step," she said. "Just one. Don't think about two. Don't think about falling. Just one." Ethan pushed himself up again, his arms screaming with effort. This time, his foot moved forward barely an inch, but it was movement. His heel touched the ground. Grace's eyes lit up. "Good." Again, he tried once more. This time, his foot slid forward another inch. He felt the chair's edge against his leg. He'd made it by the time he collapsed back into the wheelchair. His entire body was trembling. But Grace's voice was steady. "See, one step is all it takes to begin." That night, Ethan couldn't sleep, not because of pain, but because of possibility. That single step felt like a seed planted deep inside him, and he wanted to see what could grow from it. And for the first time, the idea of walking didn't feel like a dream. It felt like something real. The morning sun poured through the curtains, but Ethan didn't notice. His legs ached from last night's effort, a deep, heavy pain that made even moving in his wheelchair difficult. Yet, strangely, he didn't hate it. It was proof that he had tried. Grace entered the room carrying a tray. She placed it on the table without her usual greeting. Her eyes went straight to his legs. "Hurts?" she asked. Ethan gave a small smile. "A little, but it's different this time." Grace nodded, as if she expected that answer. "Good. We'll use that pain. It means your muscles are waking up." That afternoon, they moved to the living room. It was bigger, with more space to practice. The polished floor gleamed under the chandelier, and tall windows let sunlight spill across. The rug. Grace placed a sturdy chair in the middle of the room. "From your wheelchair to here," she said. Ethan studied the distance. It was longer than yesterday, maybe 5 steps. His stomach tightened. "That's too far." She shrugged. "Then we'll find out." He gripped the armrests, took a deep breath, and pushed up. His legs trembled instantly. One step, another dot. By the third step, sweat dripped down his forehead. The chair seemed far away, yet so close. He forced his foot forward again, and that's when his knee buckled. Ethan fell hard, hitting the polished floor with a loud thud. Before Grace could move, another voice cut through the room. "Well, isn't this pathetic?" Ethan froze. His father, Mr. Dalton, stood in the doorway. Tall, broad-shouldered, his face as cold as marble. He looked at Ethan lying on the floor like he was looking at a broken object. "You've been wasting your time," Mr. Dalton said sharply. "You'll never walk. You were born weak, and you'll stay weak." Grace's jaw tightened. "That's not true," she said, stepping forward. Mr. Dalton turned his gaze on her, his voice dripping with contempt. "And who are you to say that? A maid. Do your job and stay out of matters you don't understand." Ethan's hands curled into fists. "She's helping me," he said. Mr. Dalton laughed coldly. "Helping? She's filling your head with false hope. You think a few stumbles will make you a man? You'll just embarrass yourself." Grace's voice was steady, but there was fire behind it. "No. What's embarrassing is a father who'd rather see his son give up than try." The air in the room went still. No one had ever spoken to Mr. Dalton like that, not in front of Ethan. Mr. Dalton's eyes narrowed. "You forget your place." "I know my place," Grace said. "It's right here, beside him, until he stands on his own." Ethan stared at her, stunned. No one had ever defended him like this. Not the doctors, not the therapists, not even his father's business friends, who always looked at him like he was invisible. Mr. Dalton stepped closer, his voice low but dangerous. "If you keep interfering, you won't be working here much longer." Grace didn't flinch. "If you can't see what your son is capable of, that's your loss. But I'm not walking away until he sees it for himself." That night, Ethan couldn't shake the moment from his mind. He'd seen his father's temper before, and he knew what it meant when Mr. Dalton made threats. Grace was risking her job for him. Why? When she came to check on him later, he finally asked, "You could just do your work quietly. Why fight him?" "I fight." For me, Grace sat in the chair beside him. "Because I've been where you are," she said softly. "My brother was told to accept a life in bed, but I refused to let him believe that. We fought every day until he could stand. And when he did, it was the proudest day of my life." Her eyes met his. "I see the same fight in you, even if you don't see it yet." For a long moment, Ethan didn't speak. Then he whispered, "If I stand, really stand, I want him to see it." Grace smiled. "Okay. Then we'll make sure he does." Next morning, Ethan woke up to the sound of light tapping on his door. It wasn't the usual soft knock of a servant. This was quick, sharp, Grace's style. When she walked in, she was carrying not just breakfast, but a small wooden box. She set the tray down and placed the box on his lap. "What's this?" Ethan asked. "Resistance bands," Grace said. "Today, we make your legs remember what they're for." For the next hour, Grace had Ethan sit in his wheelchair. Loop the bands around his ankles and push outward against the tension. The muscles in his thighs screamed in protest. Within minutes, sweat dripped down his face. "Good," Grace said. "Pain means the muscles are waking up." Ethan gave her a half smile between breaths. "Feels more like they're trying to kill me." She didn't laugh. The road to walking is paved with pain. Accept it or go back to the chair forever. Those words hit him like a slap. They moved to the hallway for standing exercises. Grace stood in front of him, holding both his hands. "Today, we aim for 4 steps," she said. Ethan stared at her like she was crazy. 4, yes. "But 1 at a time," she replied. "Don't think about the 4th. Think about the first." The first step was shaky, his knees trembling so hard he thought they might snap. Grace didn't pull him, she only steadied him, letting his own muscles do the work. The second step burned worse than the first. His breath came faster. His arms ached from gripping her hands so tightly. By the third step, his body felt like it was on fire. He wanted to quit, but Grace's voice cut through the fog in his head. "Look at me, Ethan." He did. "You're not weak," she said. "They lied to you. Every doctor, every person who told you it was impossible, they were wrong. Prove it." Something in her tone, fierce, unshakable, pushed him forward. The 4th step came like a victory. His legs buckled, but Grace caught him before he hit the floor. When she lowered him back into the wheelchair, he was breathing like he'd run a marathon. Grace knelt beside him. 4 steps. "Tomorrow, 5. Okay. Ethan shook his head in disbelief. "I didn't think I could." "Okay, you can," she said. "You just don't believe it yet." Oh. The days blurred into a pattern. Morning, stretching. Resistance training, steps. Afternoon, rest and leg massages to ease the muscle tension. Evening, standing practice in different parts of the mansion, the library, the living room, even the garden when the weather was good. The pain was constant. His legs felt heavy and raw, like they were carrying bricks. But every day, something changed. A little more strength. A little more balance. Grace celebrated each small victory as if it were the greatest achievement in the world. When he managed to stand for 10 seconds without holding on to anything, she grinned like a proud coach. When he took 8 steps in a row, she actually clapped her hands. One afternoon, during a particularly hard session, Ethan stumbled badly and fell to his knees. Grace rushed forward, but instead of lifting him immediately, she crouched down. "Do you know why I don't stop you from falling?" she asked. He shook his head, frustrated. "Because you need to know that you can fall. And get back up. Walking isn't about never falling. It's about refusing to stay down." That night, as Ethan lay in bed, his legs throbbing, he thought about her words. All his life, people had tried to protect him from falling, but maybe that had been the real prison. Grace wasn't protecting him. She was freeing him. The next morning, Grace raised the stakes. She set a chair at the far end of the living room, almost 10 steps away. "By the end of the week," she said, "you're going to walk to that chair without me holding you." Ethan's eyes widened. "Without you? You'll still have my voice," she said. "And that's all you'll need." The first attempt was rough. He made it halfway before his legs gave out. The second attempt was worse. His knees locked up and he nearly fell. But on the third attempt, something happened. Halfway to the chair, his muscles stopped shaking so violently. His steps, though slow, began to feel like steps when he collapsed into the chair at the end. He was smiling through the sweat. Grace smiled back. "See? Pain is the path." The day started like any other, with Grace moving the chair into place and Ethan preparing himself for another training session. But today, the air in the mansion felt different. Tense. It wasn't long before they found out why. Mr. Dalton stood in the doorway watching them. His sharp suit and colder expression made the room feel smaller. "So," he said slowly, "this is what my son does all day? Play games with the help." Ethan clenched his jaw. Grace didn't even turn to look at Mr. Dalton. "This is not a game," she said. "This is progress." Mr. Dalton chuckled. "Progress? I've heard that word before. Every doctor used it before sending me a bill." Grace finally faced him. Then maybe they weren't doing it right. For a moment, father and maid stared at each other like opponents in a duel. Mr. Dalton stepped into the room. "Fine, if you really believe he's improving, let's make it interesting." Ethan felt his stomach twist. His father's interesting never meant anything good. "I'll give you a challenge," Mr. Dalton continued. "If Ethan can walk across the living room by the end of the month, no help, no tricks, I'll give him the funding for whatever project he wants." Ethan's eyes widened. He had a dream, a technology idea he'd been sketching for years, but his father had always dismissed it. "And if I fail?" Ethan asked quietly. Mr. Dalton's smile was thin. "Then the maid is fired." Immediately, Ethan froze. "No." Grace didn't even hesitate. "Yes," she said. Ethan turned to her in shock. "Grace," she cut him off. "If this is what it takes to push you, then so be it." Mr. Dalton smirked and walked out, leaving tension hanging in the air like a storm cloud. When the door closed, Ethan wheeled himself over to Grace. "You shouldn't have agreed to that." If you fail," she interrupted, "it's because you chose to stop trying, and I don't believe you will." Her confidence both scared and inspired him. From that day, training intensified. Grace pushed him harder, extending the sessions from 1 hour to 3. She made him walk short distances without her hands, just her voice guiding him. Every stumble was followed by a reset. Every fall was met with the same firm command. Again. At night, Ethan lay in bed, his muscles screaming. But every morning, he got up and faced it again. Halfway through the month, Ethan managed 12 steps in a row. Grace didn't praise him immediately. She simply wrote the number on a small notebook she kept. "What's that for?" Ethan asked. "Your scoreboard," she said. We measure the wins so you can't forget them. On the next page, she drew a line all the way to 30. That's the goal. 30 steps. Ethan stared at it. 30 felt like a mountain. But now he could at least see the base. One afternoon, as they were training in the garden, Ethan tripped over a loose stone and fell hard. The impact sent a sharp pain shooting up his leg. He clenched his teeth, holding back a yell. Grace was beside him instantly. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head, more out of stubbornness than truth. "I'm fine." But when he tried to stand, again, his leg wobbled dangerously. Grace's eyes narrowed. "That's enough for today." "No," Ethan said. "If I stop now, I'll lose the rhythm." They argued for a few seconds, but in the end, Grace let him try again. This time, slower. Each step deliberate. When he finally reached the chair, he collapsed into it, sweat dripping down his face. But there was a spark in his eyes as the final week approached. The pressure grew. Mr. Dalton began appearing more often, standing at a distance, arms crossed, watching. He never said a word, but his smirk said enough. The night before the challenge, Ethan barely slept. He kept imagining the look on his father's face if he failed, and the empty hallway if Grace was gone. When Grace came in the next morning, she carried no training tools. Instead, she placed her hands on his shoulders. "Today is not about your father. It's not even about me. It's about you. Prove it to yourself, and everything else will follow." That afternoon, the mansion's living room became an arena. Mr. Dalton stood on one end, arms folded. Grace stood quietly off to the side. Ethan took his place at the far end of the room. The distance looked endless. 30 steps. Grace caught his eye. She didn't smile. She simply mouthed the words, one at a time. The room was silent. No servants whispered. No footsteps echoed on the marble floor. All eyes were on Ethan Dalton. Sitting in his wheelchair at one end of the living room, the distance to the other side looked longer than it ever had before. 30 steps. Just 30 steps between him and everything he had been told he could never do. At the far end, Mr. Dalton stood with his arms folded, his face unreadable. Near the wall, Grace stood with her hands clasped in front of her, watching. She wasn't smiling, but her eyes held that same fierce belief she had carried since the day they met. Ethan placed his hands on the armrests, took a deep breath, and pushed himself up. His legs trembled immediately, but he didn't sit back. Down. One step, he told himself. Just one. The first step was clumsy, but it was a step. His heel touched the floor, his weight shifted forward. The second step was smoother. The third burned, his knees screaming in protest. He could hear his father's voice in his head, "You'll never walk." But louder than that was Grace's voice, one at a time. By the 7th step, sweat was running down his temples. By the 10th, his breathing had grown heavy. The chair behind him was far away now, so the only way out was forward. Grace's voice cut through the silence. "You're halfway." Ethan didn't look at her. He couldn't. If he did, he'd lose focus. But the sound of her voice gave him something to hold on to. Step 15 came with a near disaster. His left foot dragged, his balance tipped, and for a split second, he thought he was going down. Mr. Dalton took a half step forward, not to help, but to see if the fall would come. Ethan's hands twitched at his sides, wanting to grab something, but there was nothing there. He steadied himself, heart pounding, and took another step. Step 20 felt like walking through fire. His legs were heavy, every muscle screaming to stop. His chest heaved, and for a moment, the room seemed to spin. Then he heard Grace again. Her voice low, but strong. "Look at me, Ethan." He did. "You're not walking for him. You're walking for you." Step 25. Almost there. His body felt like it was about to give out, but the sight of the far wall was pulling him forward. Step 28. He could see his father clearly now. Mr. Dalton's arms were still folded, but his jaw was tight. Step 29. Grace's hands were covering her mouth, her eyes bright with unshed tears. And then, Step 30. Ethan reached the far side of the room. His legs buckled, and he collapsed, but not into his wheelchair. Into Grace's waiting arms. The room erupted in sound. The other maids gasping, someone clapping softly. The faint creak of Mr. Dalton shifting his stance. Grace knelt beside him, her voice shaking. "You did it." Ethan was breathing hard, sweat dripping down his face. But there was a smile there, one that felt different from any smile he'd ever had before. "I walked, 'cause you believed." Grace's own eyes shimmered. "No, Ethan, you walked because you believed." Mr. Dalton stepped forward. For the first time in years, there was no mockery in his tone. "I didn't think you could do it." Ethan met his father's gaze, steady and unflinching. "That's because you never tried to see me." The words hung in the air like a quiet victory. Mr. Dalton cleared his throat. "The deal stands. I'll fund your project." He glanced at Grace. "And I suppose you'll be staying." Grace said nothing. She only looked at Ethan. That night, the mansion felt different. Ethan didn't return to his room in the wheelchair. He walked there slowly, with Grace beside him, her hand lightly on his arm. When they reached his room, Ethan turned to her. "When you came here, I thought you were just another maid." Grace smiled. "And I thought you were just another spoiled millionaire son. Guess we were both wrong." The next morning, Ethan woke, with his legs aching worse than ever, but he didn't care. Because now, every step he took wasn't just a fight against weakness. It was proof that he could break the limits the world had set for him. And somewhere deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning.